أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها وإذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل. إن الله نعم ما يعظكم به، إن الله كان سميعا بصيرا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم، فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر، ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا. ألم تر إلى الذين يزعمون أنهم آمنوا بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك يريدون أن يتحاكموا إلى الطاغوت وقد أمروا أن يكفروا به، ويريد الشيطان أن يضلهم ضلالا بعيدا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد، الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. صدق الله العظيم.
صدق الله al-Azim. Young brother Tanzilur Rahman, thanks very much for your recitation and opening this important webinar today. Firstly, let me express my thanks to Awqaf for facilitating this particular opportunity, along with the Shaykh Yusuf project that has been spearheaded by Maulana Ahmed Mukaddam. And this particular webinar is hopefully one of a series related to Shaykh Yusuf. But today is a special one mainly because we are here to launch the book that focus purely on Shaykh Yusuf's writings. These were texts that were written in Arabic by the Shaykh, and these have been translated by a team of individuals that were led by Professor Yusuf Dadoo and Professor Awqaf Rafudeen, both of them attached to the University of South Africa. But before we basically move on, let me also just say that I think when we think about Sheikh Yusuf, when we think about our community, there is, or rather, when we think about our community, in no way can we ever forget the contribution, the memory, the sort of legacy that Sheikh Yusuf had left for us at the Cape. Even though we do know that he came from the Malayo archipelago, more specifically Makassar in Indonesia, but having been brought by the Dutch, incarcerated at the Cape, we have been somewhat blessed by his presence. And as a result of his particular presence, we are basically here today. Now, in addition to that, we do know, and of course, I can go on with a number of points, but I would like to just remind us that all of us are aware that many who have been talking about the Sheikh, we have benefited from the specific work of our friend and colleague, Professor Suleiman Esop Dango, who is associated with, of course, who did his research at University of Durban Westville, that subsequently became the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And his work has gone through 3 editions. And all of us, and particularly the current generation that do not know anything about the Sheikh, has to sort of touch base with that particular text. So that text has really stimulated interest, has basically caused others to think further about the Sheikh. And I think this particular project has benefited indeed from that particular work as such. So hopefully this particular work will stimulate further, but we can talk more about that. And when we listen to the key editors in the project, we will sort of hear them out in a moment. But before that, let me express a special welcome to the ambassador of Indonesia, Ambassador Salman Al-Farisi, who will be sort of sharing some of his thoughts in a moment. But let me also thank each and every one who have joined us uh, on this sort of webinar. And hopefully you'll share your thoughts through questions and answers and basic comments. Some of these questions we might not be able to answer because of the sort of limitation of time, but nonetheless, we'll try to sort of accommodate whomsoever poses a critical question. But for now, let us hand over to our respected and honorable Ambassador Salman Al-Farisi. Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Good afternoon. I hope that you are well and in very good health. May I take this opportunity to convey my sincere appreciation for having me in this webinar this afternoon. I have the same appreciation indeed goes to Awqaf for facilitating this very important webinar. Distinguished speakers, participants, viewers, ladies and gentlemen, our history book recorded that in 1693, Shaykh Yusuf from Macassar was exiled to the Cape for his part in Banten Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa's resistance to the Dutch invasion at that time. A township that name on the Cape Flat remained as homage to Shaykh Yusuf. Out of the adversity of slavery and colonialism came unintended yet positive consequences, that is hikmah. Indonesian scholars, religious leaders, artists, and royalty enslaved or imprisoned by the Dutch carried with them to the Cape the rich tradition of learning as well as the Islamic faith. Over the past century, religious leaders as well as scholars from our countries and further abroad have demonstrated their admiration for Shaykh Yusuf and has been shown in various writings. I think this book is one of the so many writings on Shaykh Yusuf that we know recently. They do not only study about history of Shaykh Yusuf, but also about the religious aspect contained in the life of Shaykh Yusuf. Today we will have a launching of this book, which I believe some aspect of the religious contained in the Shaykh Yusuf teaching will be presented to us. As history tells us, long before Shaykh Yusuf arrived in South Africa, he also has a close relation with the kings, sultans, and religious leaders in Indonesia, particularly in Java, not only in social context, but also religious relation. Therefore, the Islamic teaching conceived by Shaykh Yusuf in Indonesia and disseminated in South Africa were inseparable part of Islamic values in number of sultanate in Java. So that when this interesting spiritual path are examined further, we could see that there is actual and extraordinary bond, an extraordinary bond between the two and between our two countries indeed. I welcome I indeed welcome the publication of this book that will take us to explore the spiritual essence of the great Shaykh Yusuf. This edited work, which contain selected writing from various scholars and a wonderful project that should be emulated by others, and I'm sure that the publication of this book will further enrich the literature of Shaykh Yusuf. And I think, in conclusion, I think this launch of the book will complement the project which will be launched also by the Indonesian embassy next year on the writing of some teaching by not only Shaykh Yusuf but several ulama exiled to South Africa from Indonesia with a focus on the value of liberation and emancipation, which I believe extend some inspiration from the people in South Africa to put their struggle against the colonialism at that time, as well as the apartheid. So I'm looking forward to hear from the views from the speakers today, and indeed I'm very ready to have more cooperation with your institution as well as the Awqaf in this regard. I think that's all that I would like to make in my remark. Thank you very much and enjoy this webinar. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks very much, Honorable Ambassador Salman Al-Farisi, for your input. Yes, indeed. I think thanks for also for sharing your thoughts about the Indonesian embassy's project itself. Indeed, there's the two basically complement one another. So there should be a close working relationship of sorts, hopefully institutionally as well as scholarly, and in also in different other ways. But I think you've basically shared with us, I think, importance of guides as to maybe how we need to also look at these, because after all, Shaykh Yusuf is not we all can appropriate him, and we all do appropriate him, because he has inspired us all. He is a figure who just whom we cannot afford to forget. Our children, our great grandchildren, the sort of generations to come need to reinforce that. Having said that, let me quickly just remind our participants that we have house rules. All attendees video and audio muted. You may pose your questions during the course of the webinar by using Q&A tab located at the bottom right hand tab. We will entertain these questions during the question answer session, which is basically after the presentation. So please bear with us, and after the presentation, then we will open up as such. Just also as a matter of information, this session is live streamed to Awqaf SS YouTube, Awqaf South Africa. Subscribe to the channel and refer back to it. If you have missed anything, this webinar video will be available post-event on the Awqaf South Africa website. Kindly also confirm that you are linked basically to the Google Doc I shared, sort of basically that was shared as such. All right, let me quickly just make 2 or 3 points before we bring in our colleagues. One, I think anyone editing a project such as this is no easy task. It's a laborious task on 2 levels. One, on the side of the editors, because they've got to not just edit, but also coordinate this particular project. 2, from the side of translators, as we all know that translation, anyone would translate from any language, say from the first language to a target language, from the second language to another language for that matter, is no easy task. And so when one looks at what has been compiled, in other words, the translated text that appear in this particular publication, one can take off one's kufia, maybe, or one's hat, or one's topi, whatever one wants to say, basically to say what basically you find has been pretty well done. And I think we basically are very much welcome this particular contribution. So, I mean, one can talk about other technical aspects, but I think this is basically just what I wanted to say. 2, I think when we sort of talk about these particular projects, research projects, translations, interpretation, again, is an uphill task. And I think our colleagues have done a wonderful job in bringing a team of individuals together to assist in this particular process. And so I'm sure that we look forward to reviewers, those who are very much interested in the story, not only of Shaykh Yusuf, but specifically his ideas and how these ideas have filtered down generations across historically and generationally and across the oceans, because after all, Shaykh Yusuf is from Malayu Archipelago, from Macassar specifically, but he himself has traveled widely and his ideas have also followed him. And these ideas are what we basically are engaging with. So, having sort of said all of that, let me rather specifically now come to our editors. We have 2 editors of this particular book. The one is Professor Awwais Rafudeen, as well as Professor Yusuf Dadoo, and we will ask Professor Awwais Rafudeen to kickstart and share his thoughts before we come to Professor Yusuf Dadoo. Thank you. Professor Awwais? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Professor Haron. The book Spiritual Path, Spiritual Reality, Selected Writings of Shaykh Yusuf of Macassar is firstly a team effort. It was suggested by Maulana Ahmed Mukaddam, and given the moral whole Maulana Mukaddam exercises in our community, we could hardly refuse. A team was gathered for its implementation, and thus the Shaykh Yusuf project came into being. Pivotal to this team was my colleague and co-editor, Professor Yusuf Dadoo, who translated a considerable number of the text in this book. Without his superb Arabic skills, this book would not have seen the light of day. Another pivotal member was Professor Sulaiman Dango, who Professor Haron also referred to earlier. And Professor Dango, as we know, had already made rich contributions to Shaykh Yusuf's studies, and he provided renewed as well as new translations of texts by Shaykh Yusuf. Shaykh Ibrahim Musa of Cape Town and Shaykh Muhammad Jami of Nigeria, but now in Pretoria, also contributed in crucial ways to the translations. While Nadia Sabah, a Jordanian student of Professor Dadoo, provided the transcription of the text into printed Arabic. All in all, 19 of Shaykh Yusuf's texts were selected, which we believe provides a good representative sample of Shaykh Yusuf's thought. It must be said that this project would have been considerably delayed had it not been for a most fortunate coincidence. Maulana Mukaddam's request to translate Shaykh Yusuf's text was made at the same time that Professor Yusuf Dadoo acquired a new PhD student, namely Ms. Musdalifa Sahib of Macassar, Indonesia, who is a direct descendant of Shaykh Yusuf and who planned to do research on her esteemed ancestor. Ms. Sahib, together with her father, Mr. Sultan Sahib, had collected a number of Shaykh Yusuf's texts from Leiden University in the Netherlands, where most of these texts are housed, and very generously made them available to us. If it was not for this generosity, this project would have been delayed, I think, by at least a year. In addition, Ms. Sahib, together with Mr. Muhammad Kamadin of Cape Town, also provided valuable contributions to the bibliography. Other players in the project that need to be thanked are the Muslim Educational Institute Trust for vital backing of the project, financial and otherwise. Here, I'd like to mention Mr. Abdul Kader Kurtha, Mr. Harun Kala, and Mr. Harun Aziz in particular. The members of UNISA Press, the publishers of this book, also deserve considerable praise for their hard work, especially since they do not normally deal with Arabic text. Dr. Arno Vrolijk of Leiden University provided formal permission for the use of images from their collection of Shaykh Yusuf's works. And our colleagues in the Department of Religious Studies and Arabic at UNISA, led by Professor Ismail Jaffer, gave good support to the project as well. The ever-willing Shafiq Morton provided the beautiful photograph that adorns the cover of the book. And last, and certainly not least, Professor Muhammad Haroon was a source of inspiration and an encouraging sounding board throughout the duration of the project, which stretched over, I think, 4 years actually. Editing the text provided considerable food for thought. In particular, there is a seeming paradox that lies at the heart of Shaykh Yusuf's life. On the one hand, as is well known, Shaykh Yusuf had a very busy, very well-known political life opposing the Dutch, and opposition which eventually resulted in his exile to the Cape of Storms in 1694, of course, Cape Town today. On the other hand, his texts often deal with very philosophical, highly abstract Sufi ideas. In his texts, there is no mention of politics or the Dutch at all. Rather, his texts are concerned with, as the book title indicates, the spiritual path and spiritual reality. Regarding the spiritual path, it concerns elements like the practice of dhikr, the remembrance of God, the need to adhere to Sunni orthodoxy in following the spiritual path, the need to accept the divine decree, even if it lands you up in Cape Town, the Cape of Storms, the need to show fidelity to one's spiritual guide, one's sheikh, the need to follow the spiritual path with deep humility, and also what might appear slightly ironic, not to get involved in state politics. Shaykh Yusuf thought that by that time, state politics had become rather corrupt. Sounds rather familiar, I think, globally, and rather pay attention to the purification of the self. The other major theme of spiritual reality involves realizing that in reality, Allah is the only true existence, that all of creation are manifestations of Allah's reality, and that immersion in Allah, or what the Sufis call fana, the loss of the self, is the goal of the spiritual quest. So these are the essential themes and ideas found in his text, ideas that he absorbed studying under distinguished ulama in Syria, in Yemen, in India, and in Indonesia for more than 30 years, where he thoroughly imbued the Sharia sciences under them. So how do we reconcile this paradox? In other words, his busy political life on the one hand, with his seemingly abstract, unworldly ideas on the other. In my opinion, we reconcile the paradox by taking his ideas seriously and not separating them from his political activity. There's a tendency to see, Shaykh Yusuf as a historical figure on the one hand and as a Sufi on the other, without mixing the two. However, I think we must realize that his ideas provided the foundation for his political activity. Simply put, he did not engage in politics for the sake of politics, but as part of his immersion in Allah, and duties to Allah sometimes required one to act in ways that we define as political. So it is really the quest to please Allah at each and every breath that was the central driving force throughout Shaykh Yusuf's life. This, I think, is the animating idea by which one must approach a study of Shaykh Yusuf's life. Thank you.
Shukran. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts, Professor Rafudeen. Let me quickly just say that being part of the team and focusing on historiography over the many years since the biography of Professor Dango, and of course prior to that particular publication as well, there have been other texts that focus on Shaykh Yusuf. But of late, during the past 20 years, there has been a plethora of texts that have emerged, and these have tackled some of the texts. We, for example, think of Professor Nabila Lubis, who basically did the study on Shaykh Yusuf. We think here also of Abu Hamid, who also did a specific study on Shaykh Yusuf. And then there are a number of others who did some fascinating studies. But of course, most of these are in Bahasa Indonesia, and they're not available as it in English. Some have tried to do their works in English, but I think, again, in that sort of sector, there needs to be sort of changes just in terms of how the ideas sometimes come through. But having said that, let me come now to Professor Yusuf Dadoo, who is the other important driver of this particular translation project. Professor Dadoo.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
Well, my experience with the manuscripts of Shaykh Yusuf is that in the first place, the man had a prodigious memory for recalling quotations from several sources, such as the Quran, Hadith, Ilmul Kalam, Tasawwuf, and Fiqh, considering that most of the manuscripts that were prepared were actually recorded during his incarceration in Ceylon, or what's known as Sri Lanka today. After all, you don't expect the prison environment to be a very accommodating and welcome environment in terms of the resources that it would allow in for this type of work. So all manuscripts, well, we should just keep that idea at the back of our minds. all manuscripts, according to our understanding, were dictated by Shaykh Yusuf. In other words, they're not in his handwriting, but they were dictated to one or more of his disciples. They are extremely legible, which eased our task considerably. But in terms of the thought, I would say that, there are different levels of complexity in the thought of these manuscripts. If you look closely at the title of our work, Spiritual Path, Spiritual Reality, you will find that those aspects or those manuscripts that dealt more with the spiritual path were more easily understandable. Those that dealt with spiritual reality were very, very intricate. Let me just explain that very briefly. When it comes to the spiritual path, then what he discussed were things like the importance of constant remembrance of Allah through zikr, the importance of having a spiritual guide, a murshid, having the correct belief, the aqidah, and of course, the bond between Sharia, the external law, and tariqah, the internal path to reach the ultimate reality, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These types of teachings are to be found in some of his manuscripts to a greater degree than in others. I'll just mention a few of them very briefly to you, such as An-Nafhatu Silaniya. Then, of course, others that deal with zikr in some way or the other, like Tartibu Zikr, Tuhfatul Amr fi Fadilat Zikr, and so on. Now, turning to spiritual reality, that, of course, discusses the objective or the goal that a person focuses on during his spiritual journey, his or her spiritual journey to Allah. And that spiritual goal is, of course, being united with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. That's the spiritual reality. So it discusses things like, what is the existence of Allah? These are what we call ontological issues, epistemological issues, divine existence. What is the proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us? Is he, on the other hand, distant to us? What is the status of his knowledge? These are things that are discussed in greater detail in some of his manuscripts, like Zubdatul Asrar, Tajul Asrar, Matalibul Salikin, and Ma'na al-Wujud. The result of it all is that, given the present environment in which all these writings were done, there were bound to be spelling, grammatical, and even citation errors. Some quotations were simply paraphrases, but not the exact words. This applied in the case of many verses of the Quran, as well as even certain ahadith. But despite these shortcomings, I would say very confidently that the thrust of his arguments have been very, very clear. Regarding this particular aspect, I think I wouldn't like to go into details now, but if there be any questions relating to some of these broader issues pertaining to this, these types of complexities, I will gladly answer during the Q&A. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah khair, Professor Dadoo, for your inputs. Again, I think as we listen to his thoughts and giving us insights into the contents of this particular work, I think it only wants us to really get the text and start reading it for at least two reasons. One, I think all of us, we basically live in an environment that is highly materialistic, and the thoughts that the Sheikh basically shares with us, as from what we had heard, uh, is very much spiritual in orientation, and it is that dimension that we lack. And I think the Sheikh's writings basically helps us along this pathway. We must also bear in mind that Sheikh Yusuf was associated with a number of turuq, a number of tariqah, that is Sufi orders. And of course, we are familiar with his Al-Khalwatiyya order, but he was also associated and affiliated with others, as just mentioned. So, yeah, so the work really will draw us into it, basically looking at some of these ideas. But let me stop here and basically bring on board Maulana Ahmed Mukaddam. Maulana Ahmed Mukaddam, as we know, has been one of the key individuals in this particular project. He might be behind the scenes, but he was very much in the forefront as such for us all. And so we ask him, as one of the key members of this particular project, to share his thoughts.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakat. Program Director, Prof. Muhammad, Haron, colleagues, His Honorable Ambassador of Indonesia, and our most respected and committed listenership, viewership. I think it takes quite an effort to take out time to be part of these knowledge activities, and we deeply appreciate all of those people from all over the world that are tying in. In fact, one of the questions that came in requested that I speak a little bit Urdu about Shaykh Yusuf, but I think we'll see if a question comes up in the Q&A, maybe perhaps at that time. Because of the presentation time for each panelist is quite limited. We need to get in as much as we can. The whole idea of this project, it started from an idea, and it is understandable that at some point, and the whole project, Shaykh Yusuf's life, if you have heard even what the ambassador said earlier, Dr. Awqaf, Professor Muhammad Haron, Dr. Dadoo, the underlying point of his unwavering, resolute belief in Allah, this absolute copying or emulating rather Sheikh Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi's Wahdat al-Wujud concept of Tawheed, unapologetically, to the point, as Dr. Awqaf says to us, even through all his militant activities as well, his jihadi activities against the Dutch, in his works, he never at any time even mentions them. So to him, they were just an accident of history, as it were. But that accident did come to South Africa, and that is why it is very important. But before I just go further, I'd like to take this opportunity. I think in a some veiled way, the ambassador did allude to it, but I'd like to be more clear about it. Professor Muhammad Haron did thank all in one from the people, and Dr. Awqaf also did that, if I heard correctly, thanking the people who retrieved the manuscripts, the individuals, the institutions, etc. But I'd like just to tarry for a minute and actually thank the erstwhile Dutch government in 1694, who arrested Shaykh Yusuf, incarcerated him, and then sent him to a safe place. And that safe place is none other but then, as Dr. Awqaf says, the Cape of Storms, and today the Cape of Islam, inshallah. So I would like to actually thank them, and this is not tongue-in-cheek, but it is in line with Shaykh Yusuf's philosophy. Prior to this, I would have probably been a bit more agitated about the imperialist projects, etc., and correctly so, because this project is also about the restitution of person, place, and things, and I'll just talk shortly about that. So I want to thank them for that Allah allowed them to use their resources, unbeknown to them, to bring the founding father, him, his retinue, his texts, his memory, collective memory of some of his texts which he wrote from memory in the Cape, the Quran that he brought with, the first Adhan, etc. So we are eternally grateful to the Dutch government for having brought Shaykh Yusuf to our country. It is absolutely in line with his commitment and his idea of Tawheed, that makaru wa makar Allah wallahu khairul makirin. They plan, Allah plans, and Allah's is the best of plans. And for that matter, the coincidence that Dr. Dadoo and Dr. Awqaf talked about, I don't think those are coincidences. I still believe, again, on the capacity of Wahdatul Wujud, we're still learning that idea and that belief and practice. In the case of Shaykh Yusuf, it's a practice as well. He practiced what he preached and what he believed in. So those are not coincidences. When the idea comes to me and I talk about it and I speak to Professor Muhammad Haron, speak to Dr. Awqaf, speak to Dr. Dadoo, etc. They speak to others again. These are not coincidences. This is the fiat of Allah. In Wahdatul Wujud, Allah is necessarily existent. The rest of history is his fiat. And so even now, as it turns out, and I think we ask the question, why didn't it emerge 100 years before, 200 years ago? I suspect that this is also Allah's plan, that when a community is now beset by varieties of ideological bends, and that where in fact historical and spiritual continuity in one is one more casualty inside and outside the house of Islam, the traditional stability of religions in general has increasingly come under strain in our fast-changing world, and the hyper-politicization of faith systems. We are globally witnessing a move to the religious right wherever you want to see, in Europe or in the Americas, wherever you are. Even the politicians are in the right, and there seems to be a good constituency. Hence, this is how these leaders emerge. I won't be taking particular names to give any credence to them, just as a phenomenon that's happening globally. And of course, the rise of nationalist chauvinism. So this new faith power nexus tends to displace preceding religious histories and spiritualities. And in the case of Shaykh Yusuf, we've been alienated because of Dutch imperialism's hiatus, the intervention of British colonialism, another hiatus that came in, another hiccup that came in the form of a 50-year reign of the Afrikaner, nationalist, Calvinist system of government, belief, practice, education, Calvinism with it. And of course, now presently, the ANC human liberalist approach to things, which they perhaps think is the best. Having said that, 1994 did, with political space, all other subcultural or religious groups had an opportunity, because the South African Constitution is one of the more enlightened, and we do have a greater space now. In fact, at one point, it was absolutely forbidden to mention Islam in our beautiful Cape Town, in the mother. Today, alhamdulillah, the adhan resounds in the city bowl. So given that situation, we felt it was important to link the community, especially if it's the founding father, the founding documents. How is it that we import, as many of our students have gone, we've gone to India, we've gone to Pakistan, we've gone to Malaysia a little, we've gone to the Middle East, to Saudi, to Kuwait, to Egypt, to Jordan, and a few other places in small numbers. Each of our graduates in the last, say, 100 years, possibly or less, brought back those ideologies, etc. And in some cases, we actually didn't look at our own authentic historicity and authentic spirituality. And I think this project is also one of restitution against and it's a decolonial project as well. And that idea, Dr. Ghairunnisa Paleker alerted me to that. She is very much in the historiography, which she'll probably talk about. So the alienation that we suffered through those various hiccups in our history we feel now is the time possibly, or at least Allah decided it was the time. And so Shaykh Yusuf's person, his place in our society, in our thought processes, and the things around him, the things I would refer to his writings and his texts. And so therefore this very venerable group have done a tremendous historical and spiritual duty, which inshallah will become some of the things they will require in the akhirah, inshallah. So one way of then recovering such lost origins is via literary archaeology, as I say in the foreword of the book. Maybe I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but I think I must take this opportunity and just show the beautiful, mashallah, book that inshallah is obviously being launched today. So one way of recovering was through this literary archaeology, as it were. So this book is one such attempt among many others in recovering and restoring an authentic lived spirituality. That's the difference with Shaykh Yusuf. It was a lived spirituality, and it's a lived Sharia in practice, if you wish. In this case, it is the history of South African Islam and its founding persons, places, and things. Specifically, it finds and translates the texts of one whom many would see as the father of Islam in South Africa. So biography and theology can combine to give us a clear insight into the type of history and spirituality that was generated by the coming of Shaykh Yusuf alayhi rahmah to the Cape. And that was to leave a definitive impression on South Africa's history and its Muslim community in particular, from the 17th century to the present. And we hope that this contribution will legitimate some of the early practices and ways of thinking and believing, especially in the Cape, which very much is alive, but that there are tremendous challenges even as we speak about those moderate belief systems that were there. Regarding the present though, and as these lines are being written and as this webinar is being hosted, we are witnessing the vigorous establishment and institutionalization of more Puritan forms of Islam locally and globally. And this can remind those who lean towards Puritanism of the undiluted Sunni Sufi foundations of the religion in this country. A vital contribution of this work then is to place into context and perspective the aberration of Puritanism and militant Islam, whose adherents have reduced a rich and complex world religion to an instrument for narrow purposes, therefore helping to in fact generate the phenomenon of Islamophobia. Shaykh Yusuf Al-Maqassari is clearly an unapologetic Sunni Sufi believer, activist, and practitioner of a balanced Islam with an authentic history and spirituality. It is authentic because it is sourced in the pure teachings of the Holy Prophet ﷺ in the Quran, and it has been passed down through his text and through that perpetuation through generations of many other pious Islamic scholars and saints. Perhaps this is what is the crux of our work. Perhaps we should reconsider exchanging our old proven lamps for new ones, the more artificial ones. In reality, we will be exchanging authenticity for its poor imitation, no matter how attractive the latter may appear to be. So while Shaykh Yusuf, follows Shaykh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi and is faithful to the philosophy of Wahdatul Wujud, namely the realization that only Allah is necessarily existent, all else is his fiat. With that, he still does not resort to fatalism. This is one of the modernists' critique of traditional studies, that the fatalism that it breeds, and perhaps there is an argument for that, which we can discuss at another point. But Shaykh Yusuf, particularly in his Sunni Sufi approach to life, to his commitment to his jihadi activities in his home country, he is fully conscious that activism is itself part of that fiat. And he so in fact participates fully in helping to shape Islamic theology, spirituality, history, geography, and archaeology. This, Shaykh Yusuf tells us, is the true meaning and practice of jihad. So in fact, This project is one of restitution, one of resurrecting the texts and bringing the community close to its original foundations. Shukran. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks very much, Maulana, for, I mean, you've really shared quite a few thoughts with us, and one agrees fully that yes, this is a way of revitalizing the, a form of restitution of sorts that we need to reconnect with. So the Rs are really critical in this particular sense. Just as a matter of information, we have poll questions that we have been putting up along the way as the discussion flows. So please respond to it when you can. Before we bring in our next colleague, let me basically say that, as we know from what we had just heard, this particular book has been a critical part of this larger project that the team has been busy with. Now, the second part focuses on historiographical dimension of Shaykh Yusuf in terms of the sort of evolution of his ideas, the emergence of the writings, and how these writings interconnect with one another. We're talking about research projects, we're talking about publications, whether articles, whether basic conference papers, because all of these, one way or another, cover a particular dimension. Some might regurgitate the same information, but others have some unique contributions to make. We have seen some Indonesian scholars who basically have done so. And so in a sense, we basically commend them for their interactions with the text of Shaykh Yusuf. But let me also say this, that the number of researchers that have come on board have come and looked at the texts and ideas of Shaykh Yusuf and the life from different dimensions. Like we said, of course, they basically sometimes might regurgitate some of the historical information, some sort of diverting, but I think important to bear in mind that sort of these are, they all in a sense give us a sense of some idea of the rich life of this important iconic figure that we claim at the Cape. But of course, he's not only ours, but he's also those in other parts of the world where he has been and has lived his life. So let's sort of listen to Dr. Ghairunnisa Paleker, who's one of the key members of the sort of other project related to Shaykh Yusuf. Dr. Paleker?
Yes, thank you, Professor Haron, and assalamu alaikum to everyone. As you have hinted, the second part of the project very much underway and is a historical biography of the scholarly canon on Shaykh Yusuf, or the historiography, which looks at the scholarly output that has been generated by this historical figure. As such, it is also secondarily a biography of Shaykh Yusuf as it has been represented in this diverse range of scholarly canon of what can arguably be called Shaykh Yusuf studies. Now, as both a historical figure and a subject of research and study, Shaykh Yusuf is really global. As a historical figure, his person, his teachings, and his writings have traveled what has been identified as the early modern globalized world, in which the Indian Ocean world was figured quite prominently. Likewise, the scholarly output generated by this historical figure is both global as well as trans and interdisciplinary. So a range of scholars from different disciplines have applied different theoretical as well as methodological lenses to the study of Shaykh Yusuf. The book that we are launching today is a translation of the primary sources, which are the texts written by Shaykh Yusuf, while the historiographical part will be dealing with the secondary sources. So this book today becomes a secondary source that we, the historiographical team, will be working with. Now, the scholarly canon that forms part of the historiographical study can be broadly divided into two overlapping, not semetically sealed categories, focusing on the religious and spiritual life and texts of Shaykh Yusuf, and the historical figure, the political prisoner and exile. Our focus on the historiography is really in acknowledgement of the abundance of scholarship generated by Shaykh Yusuf and the necessity to make sense of this scholarship and its abundance as both historical figure and religious and spiritual leader. And what I mean by historical figure, and my reference to him, is very holistic and includes, of course, the historical fact of his existence, but also his impact on history. Now, the second part of this project, which we are currently busy with, looks at, will draw together this scattered and diverse scholarship and place these in their own historical and contemporary context. And what I mean by this is that each text, each study on Shaykh Yusuf has its own history, its own biography, shaped by global trends in scholarship, ranging from the overtly Eurocentric to theoretical and methodological approaches emerging from post-colonial studies or subaltern studies. One of the, if I can give sort of concrete examples, one of the most recent studies is Sarah Jappy's doctoral thesis on Shaykh Yusuf, which has been shaped in large measure by an emerging trend in transoceanic studies, which in turn has been shaped by broader trends in world history emerging in the 1990s. Now, placing texts in context is thus the primary focus of the second part of the project. And in doing so, we will be able to chart the broad scholarly trends and changes that have shaped the study of Shaykh Yusuf. Now, why would it be important to know the kinds of trends that have shaped research and studies on Shaykh Yusuf? And it's important because these, we get Shaykh Yusuf, we get to understand Shaykh Yusuf. You know, the Shaykh Yusuf that comes to us is mediated by these studies. So it is important to be able to understand how these different studies and the way in which they've been shaped, whether theoretically or methodologically by the various disciplines. It's important to understand that and place it in context so that we get to understand the kind of Shaykh Yusuf that is represented. So, you know, this is just a brief outline of the second part of the project, and very much a plug for what is still to come. So I will leave it at that, and thank you very much for the time.
Thanks very much, Dr. Paleker, for your input. I think let me just sort of reconnect one or 2 points that you made. I think this is indeed a text in context. In other words, the second part of the project, in other words, to try to locate his writings in a broader context. But the second part, and more important part, also is those of us who have been in the area of research during the past 10 years and more would note that there has been a great deal of interest in Indian Ocean Rim studies. And there's been a team of individuals such as Isabel Hofmeyr at University of Johannesburg, who's also linked to University of New York, who's been sort of done wonderful work as such. And of course, she mentioned not Professor Hofmeyr, but our colleague Professor Paleker mentioned, for example, Sarah Jappy, who has been also very much involved in some of these research projects. And so the Indian Ocean research sort of arena is broadening, is deepening, is expanding in terms of research, because the interconnectedness has been underplayed over by researchers, either because not necessarily a fault of theirs, but because it was sort of sidelined academically. And now all of a sudden we realize the interaction between communities across the Indian Ocean has been for generations. Those from Java, those from Kerala, those from sort of other parts of sort of the Indian Ocean have connected with people in Madagascar, in Mozambique. And so in a sense, this particular study, or the studies as such, hopefully will be a contribution in that direction. So in a sense, we should look at the broader picture of where these studies will be sort of making their inputs. But I think it's also what one should understand, this appreciation of scholarly works. Again, let me sort of try to emphasize this. Scholarship sometimes, even within our community, might not have been that much appreciated, partly because maybe we were not informed as to the value of digging into the past, of resurrecting people's ideas, of giving life to their ideas. And here we're looking at Shaykh Yusuf, and hopefully we'll be looking at Tuan Guru and then others, as the Ambassador Salman Al-Farisi indicated, who basically gave shape our lives, not necessarily overtly, but covertly. Of course, nothing to do with COVID-19. More to do with in terms of how it has influenced our thinking. Of course, some of us have fallen by the wayside, but overall, their thinking have continued. Now, these projects cannot do without partners. These projects cannot do without funders or sponsors. So bearing that in mind, I think we all sometimes go out, like Awqaf itself as an important institution has been supporting projects in different areas in humanitarian sector and otherwise. And so in a sense, Awqaf has been, one can say for our project also, a partner, and of course facilitating this particular webinar. But more specifically, the sponsors, and this is where Mr. Abdul Kader Kurtha comes in. Basically, he has been one of the driving forces in assisting us to see to the publication itself. And I think let him share his thoughts with us this afternoon before we basically come to the closing and of course launching and closing of the presentations and opening up for Q&A. Mr. Abdul Kader. Brother Abdul Kader, are you?
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah. Wa alaikum assalam.
Electronic gadgetry, unfortunately. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are. Thank you. Yeah. Fine.
I'm truly delighted to be in such an esteemed company. All the professors, the editors, Maulana, and the team behind all this to bring to fruition such an exciting project. Of course, being the last speaker, I must confess that I had ample time to visit the bathroom, to put on some makeup so I look presentable on screen, and also to tap into what has been said. A lot has been said by all the speakers. A lot of ground has been covered. So what I can do is just put some flowers around some pointers and sound rather academic and intelligent. But nevertheless, as you know, I represent the Muslim Education Institute Trust along with the Al-Ghazali College. And I want to thank the team for considering us to become the partners in this exciting project. This is just the first phase, I guess. Dr. Ghairunnisa's book will be the second one. And it's been an honor and a privilege to partner in such an exciting project. I must confess that the little that I've read thus far, I want to thank the editors for their commitment and diligence. This is not easy to do. So Professor Dadoo and Professor Awais, Heartfelt thanks to you guys. A lot of work has gone into this production, undoubtedly, and of course the encouragement of Maulana and the support of Ghairunnisa, Professor Haron, and then I must also acknowledge Brother Harun Kala and Ismail Kala for unconditionally supporting this project, and of course Harun Aziz, who initially touched base with us. So, and there's a lot of players here that need to be thanked, and I think we've been thanking them along the way as we've been discussing. The reason why we thought it an excellent project, or to form a partnership with this project, is, I think let's start in the beginning. When Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that seek knowledge even if we have to go to China. Now, reading through this book, I am astounded. And I think Shaykh Yusuf took that saying literally. I mean, he's been to different parts of the world seeking this knowledge, looking for this great Sufis that could only enhance his particular knowledge. And today we sit with this wealth of knowledge. It's unbelievable. And then still finding the time to maybe keep the books aside and challenge the colonizer. This is something, this is an example. This is the most important part for me, is to make this figure, this exceptional figure, Shaykh Yusuf of Macassar, available to the public, to the people out there. If we did not do this, we would have been failing in our duties. That is why I believe that this work is so important and that it needs so much support for the people that are prepared to spend their time and to bring this work to fruition. So I would like to confirm now that we are going to run with you, inshallah, with this team to bring all the other works online, inshallah. So you have, inshallah, a partner for life up to when Allah wills, inshallah. What is important is that we take lessons from this type of character, this unique character. And you know, I've been reading Nasser al-Farabi's book, where he extols the characteristics of a good character, a true leader. And there's a few pointers here. The leader, and I think this is so appropriate, this Shaykh Yusuf embodies this, is that the leader must hate oppression and injustice. And he must distance himself from the diversions of materialism, so to speak. You know, the temptation to accept maybe positions and wealth, and then sacrifice duties towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the leader has to stand up firmly, irrespective of consequences, against oppression and injustice. Now, this is exactly what Shaykh Yusuf did. He was a balanced human being, somebody that we can use as a mentor. And now this is very, very important. And now, you know, I recently had the privilege of reading the book entitled The Killing of the Imam. And now here we have a contemporary example of Shaykh Yusuf. The Imam sacrificed his life, faced the oppressor. He had if you read the book, he had a cushy job, he had a beautiful home, he was a loving father and husband, all this type of things. And he gave this all up. For what? To fight injustice and oppression. Now, this is the lesson that needs to go out to our kids. So maybe it might be a good platform now to once again remind our team. Let us have a little booklet for our schools, for our learners, on the character and the life of Shaykh Yusuf and others like him. Let us get to know them, because we've forgotten them. And you know, there's, I think, a concerted effort, like Maulana alluded to, is being made to dissuade and destroy our legacy, the Islamic Muslim legacies. No, This book, I think, goes a long way in rebuilding and reminding us that do not forget your glorious past, which we must implement today so that we can have a glorious future, inshallah. So once again, Jazakallah to the entire team for producing this seminal, this important work that I think will go a long way. It'll be, I believe it'll be widely read because from Arabic to English, so it's available to a wider readership. And I'm looking forward to more coming on stream, inshallah. And once again, thank you to everybody. And we devote ourselves to this project. We are extremely excited about this particular project. And a lot has been said, so I'll stop talking. And maybe I was trying, while I was taking this break, Prof, I was trying to set the get the ambience right, setting. I don't know if you guys can see it in the background, but I think I failed miserably. It doesn't really matter. I needed more time, I guess. But Jazakallah once again, and I look forward to participating in other events regarding this particular work. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, and thank you very much. Thanks very much for your support, and particularly the Color Brothers and others who have been putting their hands in their pockets as a way of seeing this particular project to the final stages. Just a matter of information, poll 3, if you are asked to identify the most prominent and influential Muslim figures in Africa's history, do you think that Shaykh Yusuf's name would be listed among the top 10? So for those of us would like to just get the response. But let me sort of, I sort of liked sort of your last comments too, in terms of how you connected the Shaykh as an important iconic figure to contemporary figures who have themselves been standing up against injustice within the South African apartheid setting. And of course, there's much that can be sort of said about those. But let me basically say, I think what has been presented, and I think in terms of what has been shared as such, let us bring back Maulana Ahmed Mukaddam just to basically put the cherry on the top to finally launch this particular text, and then we open up this particular platform for questions and answers. But just before he does that, let me also just quickly say that, I mean, taking from a cue from Professor Dango on the YouTube side, that indeed most of the writings of Shaykh Yusuf had been done in the archipelago whilst he was there. But subsequently, of course, when he was incarcerated in Ceylon for about 10 years, he did some of the other texts, manuscripts. But as far as we also know that nothing was written at the Cape. So in a sense, these were so-called important texts. But having said that, I think what is important that we had this magnificent, iconic figure on our soil, in our midst, of course, talking more virtually in terms of, historically, and of course, his life continues to inspire us, and these writings just add more to that. In other words, it will continue to, we can draw from it because it's now there in translated form. We can learn from them. We can also transform them and make them available in maybe different ways to our generation. Because one question asked, to what extent has the Shaykh influenced our current young generation? And of course, these steps of writing about the Shaykh and of course making available his writings is there to stimulate that, and hopefully other young writers will come in, draw from him, and translate those ideas, not translate in the sense of translating from one language to another, but translating his ideas sort of and sharing it with the current generation. But I mean, I've said enough. Let me come back to Maulana Mukaddam, please. Honor us with this.
MashaAllah, Prof. Muhammad Haron is the moderator. Could I request you to request Ambassador Salman Farsi, the honored ambassador, to
Why not?
Just say the words and say, hereby we launch the book Spiritual Path, Spiritual Reality, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think as a virtual launch, that would be good. In that way, we're also linking Cape to Macassar.
Indeed, indeed. Please, I'm best.
I'll keep the book up so long.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. It's an honor for me indeed. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I hereby to launch the book. What is the path of the spiritual path, the spiritual path, spiritual reality. Selected writing on Shaykh Yusuf. May this book will enrich our knowledge not only about Shaykh Yusuf, but also the teaching of Shaykh Yusuf and how we will use the teaching as our guidance in making us closest with our Sharia. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm very happy to have that book as soon as possible. Maybe we will have some books for the collection of our embassy, as well as I will share it to some dignitaries in Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Salman, thank you for your presence and for your input and for sharing and for doing the honors, as Maulana indicated, that indeed you are with us and supporting us in this particular project. So thank you for that. We basically have now reached the point of. Thank you. Maulana, if you want to say a few more thoughts, quick ones before we open up for question and answer.
Okay, whilst they're waiting,
oh,
here,
Maulana, are you there?
Yeah, just for the viewers, I don't know if it's clear, but not the little writing on the side there, but the actual text. This is a picture of the actual text of Shaykh Yusuf, probably not written by him, but dictated and written by somebody else. But also interesting that to see something that's almost over 300 years old, and the Arabic script, as Professor Dadoo did mention on the technical side of things, it was quite clear to read. Obviously, the team had one of Professor Dadoo's students had it typed, word processed in those formats. But this is, I don't know if it's clear, but you can actually see some of those, the particular. I'm not too sure what type of writing it is, but very interesting. Just to have had it in one's hand or in front of one, to connect to an artifact that is very much alive still in the Cape community. As you correctly said, not perhaps covertly, but very clearly, we can safely credit the first adhan and the first Quran recitation and the first salah to have been recited in Macassar by Shaykh Yusuf and his companions.
Okay, shukran. Thanks very much, Maulana. Let me now basically come to the point of opening up. Of course, there have been questions that have been posed on in the chat column as such. But before we basically go there, let me basically say this, and I think also in response to one of the questions that was asked, that I think the idea of Brother Hilmi Hartley, for example, asked what, asking that to what extent South African researchers maybe learn Bahasa Indonesia, and I think he's right. I think we should basically go across the ocean, so to speak, and learn other languages, because after all, learning other languages only opens up other avenues of learning, of ideas, of cultures, and we can only do so if we open to it. And this is how we should encourage our current generation of children and learners to really not be closed, but open, leave doors open for learning and through different languages. So yes, one would agree that Bahasa Melayu should be a language that we should try to learn, so that, and of course if we can sort of master it, great. And we do have individuals who have managed to do so, but we want them specifically to do that for the sake of research, basically to explore text, to explore iconic figures, to explore cultural relations and so forth. And I think it will take us far, and of course would also help us to get a global picture of the interconnectedness between communities, among societies and so forth. Now, having said that, let me sort of open up for questions. Please, if you want to, you just raise your hand or indicate that you want to ask a question as such, so that we can entertain it. And please keep it sweet as possible, or short as possible rather than sweet, but you can keep it sweet too. And in that way, we can try to entertain whoever has a question. But let me also just say, we have colleagues from other parts of the world. We have James Armstrong. Those of us who don't know James, James has been very much involved in research of early Cape history, and he himself has had a major interest in Shaykh Yusuf. So he's also along with us. There have been Malaysian scholars, Indonesian scholars who have also sort of joined us. So we sort of welcome them, apart from our South African colleagues who are here with us. So please, anyone who wishes to ask, I mean, otherwise I'll go to the chat group and look at some of the questions that have been posed, and then try to raise them with our panelists who might be able to respond to them. Please, if anybody has a question, raise your hands or basically indicate so, and then we can do so. But let me take one or two of the sort of questions that that is there, or that what was Sheikh Yusuf's role in South Africa is a very broad question that one sort of that Zainul Abidin basically is asking. So if any of our panelists wish to basically respond, specifically our editors, and then maybe even Maulana Mukaddam or Ghairunnisa, please add your voices to the conversation. Anyone? Maulana, yeah, please. Maulana?
Okay. Yeah. Now, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I mean, quite clearly, however, you can argue and debate and put points for and against, as it were. But I mean, in terms of the physical arrival, the historical arrival of historical Islam to the southernmost point of the African continent, we don't have any other archaeology or geography or history that points to any other person except Sheikh Yusuf. There were others that did come on the footwork before that, because look, the Dutch were there already at 1652. I believe some of the Constantia or the other sheikhs did come shortly after that. But in terms of proper impact, as an accomplished scholar, Sufi, Mujahid, we have to, just on that basis, we'll have to say that clearly Sheikh Yusuf can clearly be, without detracting from any other historical and spiritual contribution to Islam at the Cape, Sheikh Yusuf clearly emerges as the father, emerges as the founder of Islam. Yes, the institutionalization of Islam, because Sheikh Yusuf was there for very few years. That is correct. I think 5 years. Am I correct, Professor Muhammad? 94 to 99.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So clearly, in the time of the ox cart, you know, if we look at how to measure time, you measure time today in terms of light seconds, but like that time. So the chances of the fast spread of Islam from Macassar to the Cape, etc. Clearly, I can understand some of the scholars' reservations about that, and clearly that crown goes to Tuan Guru. And as you correctly said earlier, we definitely need, after this second part of the project is complete, we are not stopping. We are carrying on with the other sacred persons, places, and things that made us who we are, who gave us our historic and spiritual identities. So he still clearly remains the most vital link. Allah decided that he be the person that brings the original texts. He may or may not have written other texts here that I'm not aware of. Professor Dadoo can tell us more. Dr. Awqaf, Professor Muhammad Haron probably as well. So the bringer, or let's put it this way, the founder of Islam at the Cape in South Africa, because the other strands of Indian Islam came later, say the mid 1800s and later. So it's quite a big gap. 1694, end of 17th century, beginning of 18th century. That's a tremendous time. Although by that time at the Malawi Lake. Muslim communities of great stature, I think, do even precede that. But as far as Southern Africa, South Africa is concerned, Shaykh Yusuf, I think unchallenged, is the founder. And I think Tuan Guru can be very and I think the historians talk about that, can be considered the one that institutionalized Islam as a permanent way of life, as we even presently proudly look at the Cape community.
Okay. Okay, Maulana. Shukran. May I sort of ask Professor Yusuf Dadoo, maybe to just add your voice to what had been said?
Yes, Maulana has covered this question adequately. I would just like to say that, both in terms of time as well as in space, Shaykh Yusuf couldn't have been expected to do more. I mean, as we say, he was here for just about 5 years. And then, well, of course, I mean, he was sort of banished to a locality in those days outside of Cape Town. So while he did whatever he did, and I mean, he did a wonderful piece of work, there is no doubt that time and space were not really in his favor to institutionalize Islam, as was later done by Tuan Guru, who arrived here in 1780. And from that point of view, perhaps one could say that, the role of Tuan Guru was more formidable. But well, that's Wallahu Alam, it's a question of personal choice. We need not butt heads about this. Jazakallah.
Okay, shukran. If we can ask Professor Awqaf to add your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Haron. In fact, this actually allows us an opportunity to go back just a bit more, because I've kind of realized we haven't really spoken about the biography of Shaykh Yusuf. And if I can just quickly give an overview, and coming to South Africa. So born in 1626 in Indonesia, spent the early years of his life in Indonesia, and at about in his 20s, having studied under the ulama in Indonesia. And this again just connects, by the way, to the theme of interconnectedness also that you raised earlier, Professor Haron, as well as Dr. Paleker. There were Arab ulama as well in Indonesia, as well as Indonesians. He then moved to India to study again, and under famous ulama there, including Sheikh Nuruddin Raniri. He then went to Yemen and studied under various ulama there, associated with the Ba'alawi and Naqshbandi tariqas. He then went to Arabia, where he studied for many years, especially under, of course, a range of ulama, but especially Sheikh Ibrahim Qurani was his main teacher in Arabia. Again, we must also remember that it wasn't purely tasawwuf he was studying. Of course, tasawwuf was a central part of it, as many of these teachers were all Sufis, but it was the totality of the Sharia sciences. He then went to Syria, where he became a disciple of his Sheikh Abu Ayyub al-Khalwati. He returned back to Arabia as a teacher. He studied there, and so this interconnected this. He studied on many ulama from different regions, from different parts of the Muslim world in these particular journeys, and he eventually returned to Indonesia in 1667. Now, when he was in Indonesia, he was asked to the Sultan of Bantam in Java, asked him if he could join his court as a court scholar, which he did because they were childhood friends. And then they immediately came into conflict with the Dutch. And then, with the Sultan, he started fighting with the Dutch. This eventually led to his exile to Ceylon in the 1680s. Now, in the 1680s, while in prison in Ceylon, that's where he wrote many of his formative texts. And this is particularly remarkable because, as Professor Dadoo mentioned, one of these texts, Nafahat Ceylaniya, and the word Ceylaniya, Ceylonian, Ceylonian blessings, means that, these texts were written while in prison over there. And, he had been through all this political conflict, and he still hadn't mentioned the Dutch in those particular writings. And that's where the bulk of his texts, coming directly to Zainul's questions, that was where the bulk of his texts were written. And, prior to that, when he came to Cape Town in 1694, there is no evidence of him having written texts, as far as we know, in Cape Town. However, we mustn't also, quite true that one guru was responsible for the institutionalization of Islam here later down the line because of the conditions. Shaykh Yusuf had an important symbolic role even at that particular time. As Maulana mentioned, there was already a nascent kind of community in Macassar. It was a 12-hour journey from the center of Cape Town via ox wagon to Macassar, and people used to make those journeys. One of the travelers at that particular time, I can't just get to the name, but wrote that by 1704 already, there was a tomb erected for Shaykh Yusuf in Macassar. So he passed away in 1699. And so for the early Muslims, it was clear that he performed a very important symbolic function, maybe not in terms of text, but certainly I think in terms of symbolism, it resonated through the centuries. And I think that theme was picked up during the Shaykh Yusuf tricentenary, which was celebrated in the early 1990s, where, that symbolism was clear as the father of Islam, in a sense, in this country.
Yeah, no, thanks for those inputs, Professor Rafudeen. I think we can go on. Let me just sort of come to one or two other questions that have been raised. And one of the questioners by name of Kreinstein basically asked, basically, how did Shaykh Yusuf's ideas contribute to establish this community in the global? Again, it's a very broad question, but I think to an extent that has been answered obliquely somewhat. But I mean, are we able to basically argue along the lines that his ideas, his life, his presence here did contribute in a substantial way to the emergence of this nascent community? Anyone? Yusuf, maybe you want to, Yusuf Dadoo?
No doubt. I consider him to have planted the seeds of this nascent Muslim community at the Cape. Although he was here for a very short period of time, there is no doubt about it that his personality, his contributions, the way he could draw people to himself were indeed substantial. And from that point of view, even after his death, people still kept on, regarding Shaykh Yusuf as a kind of a focal point for their activities, their spiritual activities, Islamic activities at large. So from that point of view, no doubt, he definitely laid the seeds of the nascent Muslim community.
Okay, no, thanks. Let me just go to another question that has been posed. Is there any indication of the Ratib al-Haddad in the writings of Shaykh Yusuf, or those writings that have been translated Is there any sort of indications of any sort or connected to the Ratib al-Haddad, of course, that we are familiar with at the Cape or in along the East African coast, and of course back in Archipelago?
No, I don't seem to find any direct links of that. I don't know if
Professor
Awqaf
maybe?
could come in and say anything more.
Yes, well, maybe as Prof. Dadoo said, maybe not directly in the text that we translated, but certainly indirectly, because when Shaykh Yusuf went to Yemen, he studied, one of his teachers was Sheikh Ali Zabidi of Zabid in Yemen, and attached to the Ba'alawi order. And in fact, he was given ijaza, as they say, you know, permission to induct students into the Ba'alawi tariqah as well. So he certainly was familiar, I'm sure, you know, with the Ratib al-Haddad. I've got no doubt about that, although as we say, it's not directly maybe in his writings. A scholar who has developed this idea a bit was the late Sheikh Siraj Hendricks, who's written a marvelous thesis on Tasawwuf in Cape Town, and I think it's really a must read because, you know, he doesn't simply give an historical overview, but he really kind of develops these points connected to things such as Shaykh Yusuf's association with the Ba'alawi Tariqa, and in terms of certain of the litanies in Cape Town, he kind of, you know, makes those connections. So I think that would be an important kind of study to refer to in this kind of thing.
Okay. Perhaps maybe it would be nice just for one of you who have been intimately familiar with the writing, just to take one of those texts that have been translated and to give us, I think maybe Yusuf, you did that somewhat, and so did Maulana, just to give us a visionary perspective of that text. You know, its life, its ideas, whether it is a Selania text or any other, just to share with our participants, our audience.
All right. Nafra Silania is, I think, about the longest of texts that we actually dealt with in this collection. The style and, in fact, you know, let's say the flow of ideas is eminently, you know, comprehensible. We are in the position to follow what he's saying. What is very interesting is, well, at the very beginning, Shaykh Yusuf mentions that, you know, Allah has brought him to this desolate place. And well, of course, he goes into the name of that particular place, which I translated in a particular way. I mean, now I can't seem to recall all these little technical details now. But interestingly, like any Sufi mystical guide, what we find is, well, of course, the style is one that moves from, say, one particular topic to another quite seamlessly. Sometimes these types of things, for people who are used to, shall I say, more academically structured writings, they might find it a bit frustrating, thinking that, man, but here this person is introducing a whole lot of different issues within maybe the confines of just about a few pages. But the point is, we need to look, you know, after reading the text through once, read through it a few times more, and you actually see the interconnectedness and some of the themes that we spoke about. For example, the issue of the importance of dhikrullah. Dhikrullah is the starting point for him. That without a remembrance of Allah, I mean, nothing else will work whatsoever. And then from there, he moves on to the importance of a good spiritual guide, a murshid, saying that that murshid needs to be a person who you should behave. Well, he quotes the examples of a number of mystics before him, that in the Sufi tariqah, you should regard yourself as a corpse awaiting ritual bathing. In other words, the ghusl before putting on the kafan. In other words, it will be the murshid, the spiritual mentor, who will be doing all the cleaning and the purification of the inner recesses of the aspirant, of the young Sufi, the student. So in other words, he must be very patient. What is, of course, also very important is that we do not look for perfection in any murshid. In other words, beyond the category of the Anbiya alayhimu salatu wassalam, the idea of looking for perfection in any individual is a misnomer. Therefore, the person, the person should try to be as close to the spirit of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, but at the same time, don't look for perfection, because perfection is not going to be found. He then moves on to things like the aqidah, beliefs. And here he makes it very, very clear that he stands in the camp of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And of course, belonging to the Shafi'i school of thought, he mentions at times very obliquely. Then, of course, the Al-Maturidiyya, scholastic school, Ilmul Kalam, that he speaks about. Then he moves on to discussing the important relationship between Tariqah and Sharia. Sharia is, of course, the external code. For example, how do you keep yourself ritually clean? How do you pray? How do you give zakat? How do you fast, etc., etc.? The external rules. But the internal rules for the purification of the inner entity of the human being. That is termed by the Sufis as tariqah. Now, he emphasizes this point in Nafh al-Silaniya, as well as in a number of other texts, that you cannot have the one without the other. Otherwise, what you are going to be left with is a very, very distorted individual. You cannot have a person simply following Sharia without any focus upon his or her inner being. And you cannot have people, I mean, you get some of these people these days, for example, who speak about being spiritualists and so on, but not necessarily deciding to abide by any code of external conduct. That to Shaykh Yusuf is also unacceptable. So it's a very simple but captivating style in many of his writings. But of course, in some of them, his writings tend to become very, very complicated when he is discussing issues pertaining to Allah. The issue of wahdatul wujud that some of us alluded to during the seminar already. These types of things definitely make for very challenging, very difficult reading. Nobody can lay claim to assert that he or she has understood these things totally. We are still learning these things as we go along. So this, by and large, is my understanding of Shaykh Yusuf. He very often he behaves like kind of a guide, holding your hand, taking you through this entire course. At times he becomes philosophical, but by and large, it's that very warm, intimate style where he is actually inviting you in to accompany him to his destination.
So one can imagine oneself being in his company, personal company, and the warmth he exudes. Just, as you just correctly indicated, I mean, you can pick it up through his writings. And what still, if he had been, or if one had been in his midst? I mean,
that must have been a tremendous experience, because I mean, after all, shall we say, writings are, of course, in certain ways, they cannot have that audio visual impact that a person, that a person's physical presence will have.
Indeed. Okay, no, thank you. Professor Awqaf, maybe you want to add a few thoughts in terms of what Professor Dadoo had to say?
Yeah, no, I think Professor Dadoo kind of put it very, very well. Just a word on that second part of things, some of those extremely difficult texts, things where he talks about, as Professor Dadoo said, Wahdatul Wujud, where he also talks about things such as the A'yan al-Thabita, the permanent archetypes in creation before physical creation. All of these things are based in the on an understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. It's highly philosophical, and I think it also points for me to a need to recover those kind of elements of Islamic thinking today. To a large extent, and this is my personal opinion, and please don't shoot me down, I think we've kind of run away a bit from Islamic philosophy, the Islamic theology as well. We kind of focus just on fiqh, but Islamic theology, for example, as in the Ash'ari and Maturidi creeds, which Shaykh Yusuf is a proud Ash'ari, and Islamic philosophy also as espoused by the tradition of Wahdatul Wujud, which I must say is a continuing tradition. It started with Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi, in fact, took it from earlier Muslim scholars who traced it to the Prophet ﷺ, and also passed it down. So it's a continuing tradition, among Muslim scholars. And although in the last 2 centuries, we've kind of neglected, for whatever reasons, maybe because of the defeat, against colonial powers, we've decided to go to things that are a bit safer. But really, it's a rich field, a fantastic field. Of course, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but there's also a need to recover that tradition of Islamic philosophy, and especially in the historical moment where we are. Because, I mean, for example, even if one looks at things like COVID, and unfortunately, to a large extent, we've neglected science, and this comes out a lot in social media comments and so on. And we need to really recover those particular traditions of thought. Yeah, shoot me down.
No, thank you. I think maybe I'll ask Maulana, please. Yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahu Akbar. I feel like a student in front of Professor Dadoo and Dr. Awqaf, and I'm actually just, deeply appreciating their contribution. And in fact, I'm sure the other scholars, I'm just a student, but the other scholars that are listening in, I'm sure they're getting excited about the other possibilities that are opening up. I mean, just the simple history about one of the questions, for example, of if Shaykh Yusuf was there for 5 years, and I thought the Oxford would take a day or 2, but I see Dr. Awqaf at least found that one out. It'll take 12 hours. So I mean, I always thought it'll take a day or 2. So okay, 12 hours. 12 hours in that time probably is not a very far place. And I'm sure the Dutch have been meticulous in their preservation of histories and artifacts and texts and things like that. They didn't do it like some of our Taliban brothers and destroy stuff. They would keep it, for whatever. And I mean, many a time we've got to get our things back from them. In fact, there is even a move by the African countries at the moment of actually demanding from France and Britain and other places. I think South Africa did the same with Sarki Bartman, if I'm not mistaken. And this is what they are saying. They are decolonizing things, even our things. So it's not just person, place. It's about things also. Bring our things back. Now, I mean, I'm immediately. I think Zainul Abidin Kaji asked that question about his influence. If he was now incarcerated in Macassar, and clearly they would have definitely put some let and hindrance. But at that time, if I think geographically, Macassar should have been, is like far out. So who's going to go there? But knowing some of the naughty Cape Town Muslims, they would have definitely, if they heard their country person is there. I mean, we find evidence of it on Signally, we find evidence in Constantia, we find evidence at the foothills of Table Mountain, that there's not just one, there's 2, 3 kuburs and shrines and so forth. So I think, we sometimes underestimate what scholars consider the common religious people, of which I also talk about the Muslim common religious practices at the Cape. Many a time that is undocumented, number one. Many a times it's condescended upon because it's more based on oral tradition. Not until Western research and historical studies acknowledged oral tradition as also a legitimate academic activity, and then thereafter, started appropriating it. I mean, they even talk about myth equal to truth, for example. So until they decide that, okay, myth is now okay and this is okay. So that area for me, again, and perhaps Muhammad and Professor Muhammad and Professor and Dr. Ghairunnisa may want to even just look at that and kept the archives in Cape Town or in Leiden or in Indonesia. That context, that little community there, that 72 people or that were with him, what happened to them? What did they do? Did they venture? Did they go and do fishing? Did they go to the Cape Town flower market or not? Etc. like that. Now, that is maybe just a very simple historical thing, but even on this deep philosophical, theological, where modernist in Islamic studies look at us and say they've been fatalistic with the Asharite thought and the stagnation, etc. But I think it was not about the thought. Here we can see very eminently Dr. Awqaf and Professor Dadoo eminently shows the dynamism, but nobody seems to have appropriated. You ask any child at varsity today, our own children, they'll talk more about Auguste Comte and the founder of sociology and psychology, and have never been introduced to Islamic philosophical, theological, epistemological thinking. Sometimes we're actually not even proud about it. Maybe it is because most of the modernist scholars hasn't got thorough, hold over the Arabic language, because that it was a tremendous. In fact, when somebody talked about Bahasa Indonesia or Bahasa Melayu, this is what the colonials and imperialists did. They spoke the local bhashas and local dialect better than the people themselves. So I think that charge is legitimate, that Muslim scholars haven't done equally well in terms of appropriating the local languages and dialects. Many of your Livingstons and the others that conquered, so to speak, Africa, knew the Swahilis or the other languages. So I think that's also another area, gentlemen, ladies, this webinar and Shaykh Yusuf's work is really opening up doors and doors and doors of opportunity for further structure. One last thing, I looked at, I think it was Dr. Dadoo did the one translation on Ishreen Sifa. Now, I remember coming to the Cape 25, 30 years ago, 86, I think it was, when the streets were still hot with the riots, etc. And at the madrasas, they would still talk about tuntak sifat. You know, that was the absolute basic introduction to your madrasa teaching, your tuntak sifat. And I didn't know really when they were saying tuntak sifat. We learned our aqidah, differently. And whilst Ratibul Haddad may not have been directly spoken about, but yeah, the Tuntak Sifat clearly, that whole chapter that Dr. Dadoo translates of the 20 Sifats and attributes is a very classical text and a very classical example of how the Cape community were globalized and universalized in the Ahl Sunnah and Asharite thinking and belief by Shaykh Yusuf texts. So even on that stand, whilst he may only have been there for 5 years and that he took a 12-hour ox wagon trip to Macassar, I think there has been more contact than we would want to academically believe. Shukran.
Shukran, Maulana. I think, yeah, there are so many other thoughts that you've raised that one would like to pick up. Our time is sort of slowly inching its way toward the end, but let me pick up with 2 or 3 points that have been raised in the question. I think one of the last is that
Professor Muhammad, can I just add something quickly?
Okay.
Just to remind, and this is a sunnah of Shaykh Yusuf now. On the one hand, he has those dizzying, as even our very professional and dedicated translators have acknowledged some of the easier texts and some of the very difficult texts, which I suspect they will also surrender and say, we wouldn't be able to understand because some of it requires, experiential realities. You can't just pick up things from the text. So I'm taking Shaykh Yusuf's sunnah now. On the one hand, he's at those dizzying levels of heights, and on the other level, he probably holds the hand of his mendicant and gives him, introduces him to his tariqah. So I want to do that the same now. Whilst we were talking at those high, dizzy heights and the tremendous potential, academic and otherwise, that is there, I would like you to remind that there has been a question of where to get the book and the price of the book. Shukran.
Okay. All right. No, shukran. Yeah. For buying all of that, I think we will get to that in a moment. I think basically I'm going to use this opportunity, if you don't mind, just to wrap up, because I think our time is basically reaching sort of the end point. Firstly, I think just the very last comment by one of the brothers saying that, hey, why not set up a chair of Shaykh Yusuf studies, or perhaps a chair of Shaykh Yusuf studies in Islam. I think that's a great idea. Of course, that would be between the funders and the institution where this can be created, and hopefully it can stimulate that. So that is one. Two, I think one person also raised the issue of the Darul Ulooms, maybe where the manhaj, the program as such, can accommodate the text, perhaps the Arabic as well as translated text of Shaykh Yusuf, and basically teach it. Why not? I think it's a great idea, because here again we need to connect with our past, and here we connect ideationally with it, but also in sort of real life, so to speak. So I think that is the third one that I want to pick up quickly is, and it's a very important question that we ask about the preservation of these manuscripts. Now, of course, that person was not only referring to Shaykh Yusuf's ones, but also to the other Jawi Arabic Afrikaans manuscripts, a project that need to be digitalized. And I think we all have an interest in that. I mean, personally, myself have been interested in seeing that happen. Unfortunately, that has not happened. But I think hopefully this particular platform, and of course the team, can help to see to that as well. Of course, is need technical expertise to come in, but I think we really need to try to collate, to connect, and to find whatever manuscripts there are, to digitalize them and make them available online, perhaps through the Awqaf platform. If another complementary platform is created where these ideas can be shared, then why not? I think the opportunity is there. Let me basically use the last minute or two just to basically express my thanks to each of you. First of all, to all our panelists, to Professor Yusuf Dadoo, Professor Awais Rafudeen, Maulana Mukaddam, Dr. Paleker, and of course, Brother Abdul Kader Kurtha for the inputs. Let me also thank our Qari, Tanzil Rahman, for having recited. Of course, one would like to have commented on the ayat that he had recited, because there's a connection. There's always a connection, and one can make the connection. But of course, unfortunately, time doesn't allow us to do so. But thank you for having come in. And also for the participants for being here and making this a reality. And of course, we thank the editors for having really worked hard over the past number of years to see this particular project come to life. It has come to life, and for the funders, the Color Brothers and others, basically for your input, and hopefully further projects will emerge from this. But like Maulana had said, where is it available? Of course, at the moment, we basically, hopefully soon, we will put an Awqaf's website as well as other to basically indicate as to how you can access or get your copy. But I think with these, let me again express my gratitude to each of you, to everybody, and really thank you. And for those of our friends from abroad, from Southeast Asia, as well as from the Americas, thanks for having joined us in this particular webinar. And we greet you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, okay.